Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator of this panel will be Candice Fortin. Candice Fortin is a political organizer, producer, and consultant currently serving as the U.S. campaigns manager for 350.org, a climate justice organization. Her political work is centered around radical justice and equity. She has worked on over 30 electoral campaigns all over the U.S., centering progressive candidates. Candice has also organized on various issue-based work around environmental justice, criminal justice, housing, and immigration. She's also worked as a media and event producer, having collaborated with Marie Claire, Vice, Women's March, OK Africa, and the Grammys. Candice is a co-founder of Haven, a collective space for BIPOC women and non-binary roots towards abolition and liberation. Much of what keeps Candice rooted in her advocacy is the loss of both her father and aunt to mental health issues and houselessness.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? All right. Good. So yes, my name is Candice, and thank you for that introduction. I'm first going to introduce our panel today. First, to my left, I have Marellyn, Lajara, she, her pronouns. Marellyn is a licensed mental health counselor who obtained her master's degree at Long Island University. Marellyn has experience working with nonprofit organizations and providing mental health services within the community for the past 13 years. Her experience in mental health ranges from providing recreational therapy to the geriatric population to supporting youth and collaborating with their families to address mental health factors that put them at risk for adolescent pregnancy, incarceration, forensic history, or educational neglect. Marellyn's passion for the field came from the desire to change the stigmas that surround mental health and wanting to provide representation as a therapist within underserved communities of color. A member of the New York Psychotherapy and Counseling Center family since 2013, Marellyn has transitioned from full-time clinician to clinical supervisor, training specialist, and now senior training specialist, where she assists with the training and professional development of new therapists to the field. Marellyn enjoys being a part of both the growth of her clients and the therapists she helps train to ensure that the best clinical services are provided to our communities. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro.
Yes. And next we have Ernesto Lira de la Rosa. Pronouns are he, him, his. Ernesto is a mental health consultant for the Steve Fund. He also is a clinical assistant professor in the development of applied psychology. He received his PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Wisconsin and also received his BA in psychology and Latino studies from the University of Wisconsin as well. Dr. Lira de la Rosa has worked as a clinician, a researcher, educator, and consultant across a myriad of settings in both the Midwest and the East Coast. And clinically, he specializes working with complex trauma, anxiety, and mood disorders, stress, and burnout, and with substance abuse as well. Dr. Lira de la Rosa also has expertise working with survivors of sexual abuse, LGBTQ clients, people of color, and clients with intersectionality of identities. In addition to his clinical work, Dr. Lira de la Rosa has served as an expert consultant with nonprofits and businesses looking to create inclusive and diverse practices within their respective organizations. Mr. de la Rosa maintains a private practice in New York City and supervises master's level clinicians obtaining hours of licensure. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
And we have KAMAUU. Welcome, KAMAUU. KAMAUU is Maryland-born and raised artist, rapper, poet, and thinker. He made his first proper debut with his appearance on Queen from No Wild's critically acclaimed Ascension EP after officially signing with Atlantic Records in 2015. His unique sonic experimentation made huge waves in 2016 when he released a gorgeous Fortin EP. His first solo single, Juicifio, went on to generate over 21.8 million global streams and was handpicked by NPR as one of their songs we love. KAMAUU was also featured on Birth of a Nation, the Inspired by album with the Icarus. A year later, he unleashed his full-length mixtape, the KAMAUU cassette, Earth Gold, and continued to stoke buzz. He later carefully assembled his third offering to the label, the KAMAUU cassette, Mixed Greens, which was released during the summer of 2019. Since then, KAMAUU has dropped a few notable singles, including Mango featuring Ade Oasis with 17.7 million views, and the remix featuring Masego. The first single from his highly anticipated debut album, Lacuna and the House of Mirrors, Flings, is a seamless high-energy blend of R&B, funk, and hip-hop. Produced by DJ FU with co-production from Mick Schultz, it's a distinctive reflection on pain, escapism, addiction, and the degradation of spiritual health. Lacuna and the House of Mirrors dropped on April 28th. Excited to check it out. And thank you for being here. All right. Had to give the full bio and the full effect. So thank you everyone for being here. And I also appreciate this panel for giving me a brief opportunity to center why I'm here today. This is the 2 days after my father's birthday on May 18th. He was a houseless individual. He came to this country from Haiti in 1958. Experienced an incredible amount of trauma from both being a refugee and then later fighting in the Vietnam War in the 70s. He never received proper mental health care or access throughout the entirety of his life. It led to him being houseless for the remaining 10 years of his life to the time that he passed away. So I just wanted to take time to center, reclaim some space and some voice about his experience since he's not here. So thank you. Okay, and thank you all. Let's go ahead and get started. So, I would first like to kick this off with talking about mental health disparities in general for the BIPOC community. We know that there's a lot of barriers, a lot of issues with access, but wanted to give the floor to talk about that and how you perceive it right now.
I think I can share first. One of the main things that I've seen is that mental health isn't seen as part of general health, and it doesn't often take a priority, and that's because there are other basic needs and necessities that are not being met. You mentioned, right, being houseless, and that's one of the big issues that's faced within our community. In addition to financial difficulties, we're still trying to figure out what happened after the pandemic, right, and how everyone was impacted, not just in terms of mental health, but financially, economically. And so all of these things pose a barrier and make mental health not a priority, unfortunately, for our communities.
No, thank you for that. I really also think that as a result of the pandemic, right, we are still seeing kind of the effects. What we do know is that for a lot of communities of color, there were already a lot of pre-existing health disparities pre-pandemic, and the pandemic just exacerbated a lot of those health disparities, especially around mental health. I always get excited when I think there's more of a conversation now around mental health nationally and globally, and I think the pandemic in some ways pushed us to really address mental health, but we are not really addressing, I think, a lot of the needs for communities of color in understanding really how does mental health look like for these communities, how are they experiencing stressors as a result of the pandemic and everyday stressors. So at this point in my career as a clinician, as an educator, I have a little bit of access to what that looks like in terms of people coming in for services. And we're seeing that a lot of people are reaching services now, but at the same time, they're coming in and maybe haven't had access to these services. So oftentimes the work that we are doing as clinicians is really work that it's a little bit more intense because of a lot of these health disparities that have been exacerbated. So there is just such a high need for providing, I think, culturally responsive services for a lot of communities of color. And again, I think we are seeing a lot more of the demand now since the pandemic, and I think that's only going to continue to increase as time continues to pass by.
I think My experience in the pandemic, I think I might share this in common with a lot of people. A lot of us were forced to spend a lot of time with ourselves, which could be a very great thing if you're actually spending it with yourself. But I think the digital poaching got a lot more aggressive, and the competition from corporation to individuals' attention got a lot more aggressive because we communicated through phone now. And so this used to be a way that we could be present, and when we weren't by ourselves, we would be here. But then during the pandemic, I was here, and then to talk to you, I was also here. And then Netflix, I think, made a lot of money in the pandemic. Tinder made a lot of money. But all of this to say that I think if there were disparities before, I think within issues that we were previously aware of in mental health, I think we may also have new issues that have come from an abandonment and atrophy or atrophication, if that's a word, of certain skills, like being alone and being okay with it. Choosing to be alone and to listen to yourself, to see like what's going on, to know what you need to ask help for. And so I think it's going to be interesting in seeing how we treat that, and if there will be disparities in the treatment of the new issues that have come from new, more aggressive dependencies that result in neglect of the self.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because one of the biggest things that came up for me as well, like during the pandemic in general, is that it exacerbated how much we have a deficit of care or prioritization of care in this country, from both just how unprepared we were for a pandemic to how people were being treated and turned away, to the mental health component of it as well, and folks not having insurance or the resources for therapy. I mean, I still got a budget for that, you know what I mean? I was like, I got a job, I got a budget for my therapy. So, imagine the folks who, were getting laid off or losing their work and not being able to have that kind of access. Just curious if you guys have any thoughts around that, about that barrier specifically, and like how there's a huge financial component to people being able to have that access in general.
Yeah, I think in some ways we do know that therapy is expensive and not a lot of people have access to it. And oftentimes for us as clinicians in the field, we want to be able to serve a lot of communities, especially communities of color. But what we see is oftentimes we're fighting with insurance companies to try to, I think, get our services reimbursed at the rate that would give us a living wage. But we also know that a lot of individuals that seek services with insurance, it's also really hard for them to navigate the insurance and really try to also find affordable therapy for themselves. What we also know is that 80% of the field of mental health providers identifies as white. So only 20% of clinicians across the country are providers of color, and I think is very limiting then for people to have access to clinicians that look like them, understand their identities or their cultural identities, and that also makes, I think, very hard for people to actually find therapists. So when they start reaching out, they may not even able to find someone that can, work with them, that understands their identities.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. We see that even with all the privileges and the resources, it is still really difficult to find a therapist. I think about myself, right? A therapist who is a woman of color. And so, if this is my experience, I can only imagine what that experience can be, for the communities we work with, and how frustrating and limiting that can be. I think also within the communities, we don't know how to advocate for ourselves and what we have the right to access and to have. And so sometimes it's, well, this is what I could get, or this is what I could afford in terms of treatment. This is sort of what I'm going to settle with or settle for. And if that turns out to be a negative experience, then unfortunately we have an individual who no longer wants to seek services in the future. And that taints their experience of accessing mental health care and getting treatment.
I actually think when I really think about it, I've maybe been to one therapy session in my entire life with a therapist. I don't come from a environment externally out of the house where that's even a thought. And I think there is a disparity that also exists in the desire for therapists. What is a therapist? You know, most of the people that I was raised, I never talked about therapy to anybody, especially as like being like a black man in this place, like the optimal way of articulating my presence is to have it together, right? What I perceive, at least, to have it together, to be extremely durable. I think that's what it is. But what we think when we say extremely durable, we mean hard, not durable, and they're very different things. And not really, there's not really space for asking for help in that avatar that I would put on either. And so I think that's another disparity that I think could use a lot more light, just to reveal the possibility that, you know, you might have what I call boogeyman syndrome. You know, I go into stores since I was small and I have people watching me, you know, saying that I stole stuff. I'm like, and I don't have a receipt. Yeah. So like I did buy it and I could pull up my bank statement, you know. Yeah. And so feeling like you're the boogeyman in all these situations and then not even realizing that my voice was like almost an octave higher than my actual talking voice, because I didn't want to, I wanted to be very unintimidating because of that subconscious psychological syndrome. And that's something that was revealed to me by a friend, because he was in therapy, you know, because he was getting vocal training and he has a deep voice, and the vocal coach was like, why are you talking so high? Your voice is really deep. But yeah, so all that to say that there's a lot of things that I think that it would be very helpful for us to identify within ourselves if there wasn't a disparity in the visibility of therapy as something that actually exists in the world, in these communities too. So there's the financial disparity of access, but there's also the disparity of the desire to even have access to those things. You know, some people just think they ain't got time. You know, I need to make this money. I got bills to pay and such and so forth.
Yeah. And that's some of those points that you just brought up, I feel, is a good segue into another part of the conversation that I do want to talk about, because you named a couple of things kind of around like presentation and this pressure that we have, and also some things that feel like micro that could quickly escalate to macroaggressions that can impact our health on a day-to-day basis. So I'm interested in opening up a space to talk about that, like how microaggressions to start can really have a strong impact on BIPOC health in general, how we encounter those things on a day-to-day basis. I know when we initially had this conversation, I was chatting with my friend about cortisol and like how it can build up into like the front of your cortex here, and how that the microaggressions can impact that. Like, let's say a white woman just comes up and touches your hair and she goes about her day, right? But you're stuck there negotiating all of a sudden, like, do I say something? Do I not say something? Was that worth it? Was it not worth it? Should I call that out, or is it, you know, is it not necessary? And so you're stuck having to negotiate and harbor so many other questions and so many other things, whereas, you know, white folks can go about their day. So I'm just curious about how you guys perceive that and how it impacts the fields that you're in.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely something experienced within our communities. And so it almost leads to a desensitization at some point to what's happening around them when it is an injustice, or when, you know, when they kind of observe something, because it's like, well, I deal with this every day, or I put up with this every day, and I kind of go about my day, my business, everything's fine. Mm-hmm. And we don't realize the impact that it has, like you're mentioning, physically on us, right? Your body remembers that you had that experience, and we don't realize how it it impacts us. And these things build up over time. And, you know, to the point that you're making about we don't have time, right? There's often no time. I don't have time to think about that right now. I have to get to work. I don't have time to think about how this person, you know, their actions toward me on the way to the bus may have been because of my ethnicity, my race, my cultural background. I just have to keep going. And you know, all that stuff really aids in the deterioration of our mental health over time, especially.
Yeah, you know, I want to add a little bit of language to that because what you all are speaking to is sometimes what we refer to as minority stress. So there is like this theory that I think is so helpful for us to understand that we all as human beings experience everyday general stressors just by being in this world, right? And then those of us that have identities that are considered a minority identity experience unique and additional stressors as a result of those identities. And that could be microaggressions, discrimination, violence, prejudice. Those take a toll on our emotional health, our physical bodies as well. And I think if we don't talk about those things, we can just kind of carry that, right? And that can linger in our bodies and our minds and just makes us a little bit perhaps scared to even go outside, anticipating maybe being discriminated against, being followed around in the store. All these things begin to add up and can oftentimes lead to mental health disparities or even physical health disparities as well. The piece around here is that for me growing up in a community of Mexican descent, we didn't talk about mental health. And if we did, it was always around it's something that other people have, and it's people that are really in need of help, right? So there's a lot of stigma attached to that. And then it wasn't until I started getting into the field and realizing that, you know, all these experiences that I thought were just kind of what I had to deal with being a person of color or a man of color are things that actually are impacting my well-being. And maybe having someone I can talk to about that and them normalizing, validating, this is actually, you know, discrimination. This is a microaggression. Those things impact how you're feeling, your mood, right? We can begin to kind of give voice to some of these experiences that sometimes we don't think really are impacting us, but they do impact us in the long term.
Thank you for the language. That's really cool. I think that every part of you sees everything that you do and experiences everything that you experience. And every part of you has a reaction. And every part of you also has a memory down to the cellular level. And you have muscle memory, but you also have cellular memory. You have memory in your bones. There's a book called The Body Keeps a Score. I never read it. I'm going to. It's on my list. But the title is great because it has so much information in it. But it remembers. I mean, wires remember things. You know, if you ever see people on film sets, yeah, it remembers. You know, if I go da dun 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 da da dun 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 da da dun dun dun, right? Patterns, because I mean everything is vibration. Everything in vibration is pattern, and the universe is efficient and intelligent. So recognizing these patterns is an optimal thing. It will behoove us and parts of us to do. But the problem is when we start to create patterns inside of us, when we have muscle memory, we have, okay, so you do something, I don't like it, I'm here, right? And this becomes just a habit and a pattern with the way that I respond to this big stress, right? But then over time, it becomes a way that I respond to discomfort in general, right? But if I have certain stresses on my mind all day, I don't realize it the whole day I'm here. Right, but then this impacts something else. At a certain point, the back of my knee, everything is connected. You live in one body, right? And your mind isn't, people say mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. I just say physical, because your spirit is local. You know, your spirit, your emotions are local. You're not, if someone rips a branch off a tree in Venezuela, you're not going to be an empath to it because you don't have a local perception of that experience, you know. My definition of physical is of or having impact on, influence on the physical universe, which is not the tangible universe. So all of these things are physical and have a physical impact with physical repercussions. And we're here because we're in our bodies, and we need our bodies to exist, you know, and we carry our bodies in every interaction. So it becomes a reality of accumulating stress and habits that in the end prey on us, our own habits, and then we carry those into our interactions with other people. And then, you know, certain ways that my friends joke and I'm around them, I joke that way, I also pick up things as well. And so who knows, I might be seeing you and observing you and taking something away that's not intentional within the way that you're sitting, especially if I look up to you. You know, and then being an artist and with a platform, it's like what I'm saying has an impact, but also how I'm sitting, you know, also how I'm speaking, you know. Am I speaking quickly because of the habit of thinking that I'm taking up too much space, so I don't want to take up too much time, so I get, right? This is another stress, and all of these things pass. So, you know, everything is contagious to a degree to me. And so mental health, mental sickness is contagious as well. Mental unwell-being is contagious in certain ways, I believe. And so I think that's just my reaction to the subject matter that we're talking about, because a lot of you talked about how we carry it in our bodies, and that's contagious. And then, you know, we pass these traits on to our children. So there are certain things that I do great and things that are detrimental that I got just because I saw it. You know, as a child, I'm looking at my parents as this is how I exist as a human. So that's also something I think is important to pay attention to, and therapy helps with that. I think that we also need a culture where we imbue therapeutic actions into the culture so that therapists, you don't just have to fix everything. It's like you have a doctor. You know, a lot of health is about healing, and I think there's a problem with that. You know, I think health should be about healing a little bit, but also about strength, fortification, maintenance of optimal health. But we stuck on healing, which also infers that if health is always, in all these health conversations, we're talking about healing, we're always coming from a place of being unwell and sick. And I'm fundamentally not an unwell person. I'm fundamentally not even human. I just am. Beyond that, I'm through humanity. I'm through a man, right? But if health, to me, if healing is continually the focus of it, I'm equating part of like the centrality of what I am with sickness and a wellness. I think that's an issue too, because I think I also start to adopt that as an identity, sickness. I want to be a healthy person. I need to always be thinking about health. I need to always be thinking about healing. No. I need to be thinking about strength, being vital, being virile, being optimal, you know. So yeah, that's my spiel.
I love it. Now I'm like adjusting my back as we speak.
And it's a constant thing. Last thing I'll say is it's crazy because like all of these things, I say like posture is command. Yeah. You know, what do we do when like the king and the queen walk by, we bow to them, right? Bowing is a command. It's also a posture. You know, so I'm on my phone bowing to it all day. It makes it easier for it to command me because I've given myself to command that this is my superior. Animal, it's a trans-species posture. Wolves bow to superior wolves. Chimpanzees, I'm not sure, all monkeys. I'm bowing to my phone. And when I experience emotions that I'm, this person touches your head, you get upset about it, you're here. We're bowing to it, you know. And so it's and these things have echoes in the bones, in the emotions, in the mind, you know.
I love how you put that together. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to go back because this leads to another thing I know that we wanted to talk about when you were talking about also cultural shifts, so that it doesn't have to fall on these wonderful therapists who are already taking so much on. So one topic that we definitely wanted to unpack here that we think touches on a lot of these points is around the issue of Jordan Neely, if folks know about that. If you don't, I won't assume, so I'll just give a brief synopsis. I think it was about almost 2 weeks ago. Jordan Neely, a black houseless individual, went onto a train. I think a lot of us are used to having that experience in general. He was known throughout the community, both with houseless outreach and people in the neighborhood and on the train system as well. He loudly proclaimed that he was hungry, that he was exhausted, that he was frustrated, that he was also okay going to jail. That could be interpreted in a lot of different ways, who knows? But he wasn't armed. And a white individual in his, I think his mid-20s, who was also a trained Marine, put him into a chokehold thinking that he needed to intervene in a situation, even though there was no physical threat at that time. He put him in a chokehold that he was trained on and he knew could be deadly, and choked him for, I think it was an estimated 15 minutes with a half-full car of individuals who did nothing in that time period to stop it. So to me, I think beyond the fact that that happened, it's really hard to look at the video. I had to opt out because I think the saddest thing was how many people sat there in silence and stared and watched, and 2 people hopping in to assist with a death, and verbiage that was, oh, let him shit, and then you know that he's dead. Someone said that, who was holding him down. And to me, it was just alarming. Yes, that individual needs to be held accountable, but what about every single other individual who's on that train who did not intervene, verbalize, or anything to interrupt that? So I just want to leave the space open to unpack some of the themes that we've been talking about and connecting it here, since it's something that's currently happening right now.
Yeah, I think that, much like you mentioned, right, there was that bystander syndrome, right, that everyone was there, and almost not there. And we see that a lot. I can speak for New York City, right, where I'm from, and we see that a lot. And I wonder too what the root of that is, where that disconnect in terms of community came from, because it used to be sort of like a village mentality and community, and we were all responsible for each other. But there's been so many shifts, and the most recent one being the pandemic and kind of like our own individualistic kind of like feelings and views, but also this feeling of like, just freezing up in a situation like that and being fearful and not knowing how to respond and worrying that if I jump in, now I'm putting myself at risk, no one else is going to back me up, right? If there was that sense of community, I would feel that if I jumped in, I know Ernesto would jump in with me too, and I would feel safe to do that. And I wonder if there was also that issue of safety. I mean, it opens up a lot of conversations, I think, also in terms of how we treat the houseless, how we view mental health, mental illness, how we think that, someone on the train who is mentally ill is really scary and is out to get us, and really, these are people who are really more fearful of us than we are of them. They're struggling. And they're asking for help, even if it's not always heard or received in the way that we think help should be asked for. So those are a few of the things that come to mind when I think about that occurrence, which is only one of many other occurrences that have happened, especially over the last couple of years especially. These things have always happened, but I think they've been more in the public eye. They've been, we talk about like access and having more access to seeing these things. Now people can record, we can see these videos, we can see things happen in real time. And it's hard because we're looking at a situation that could have been prevented, right?
Yeah, this is, part of a larger systemic issue, right? And whether it's people that are on the train and we're in there being desensitized, right? Scared, not sure what to do. I think all of that, it kind of behooves us as a society to destigmatize mental health, and especially for people that are, houseless and experiencing homelessness, that we really need to understand that more often than not, these individuals are at higher risk of hurting themselves before they hurt someone else, and they're at higher risk of actually being victims of violence and crimes. But I think oftentimes we all have maybe this mentality that they are the ones that are dangerous, that are going to hurt us, but it's actually the opposite. And I think it comes back to just the system needing to provide more education, more resources, more support, so that we all as a society know what to do in those situations, right? And are aware of kind of how we can de-escalate, how we can really intervene. I kind of equate this to some of the work that the Steve Fund has done around supporting, young persons of color, especially in higher education institutions, that a lot of people, when they experience mental health issues, they go to people they know, maybe before seeing a therapist, family, friends. And oftentimes, maybe those people don't know how to support that person because they're not equipped with the language or the tools to help them, right? Some of the work the Steve Fund has done is kind of helping those families understand this is what happens, this is what mental health is, this is what signs to look out for, what you can do in those moments. And I think about how do we take that, right? If we're doing that for young people of color, which is wonderful, but how do we take that for the larger society and educate all of ourselves onto what do we do in those situations, right? What is mental health? How can we intervene in a way that really would help save someone's life? So I oftentimes think about these systemic issues and how they need to be addressed at the very top. And really more resources, more funding needs to be done to educate, destigmatize, and really give people access to this information that, again, can be very life-saving for individuals.
I watched Queen and Slim. I only like the driving scenes. I don't like watching black folks slaughtered. It triggers trauma, because even in black movies, still can't survive the scenes. I only like the driving scenes. Where I'm from, people don't survive the scenes. They never leave. Ain't no adventure movies. All drama and comedy and horror eventually. Cage birds don't sing, they scream like banshees, tangled in branches, when what you thought was home starts taking advantage. We see, if you have a green shoe and a purple shoe, every time you see the green shoes, pristine condition, right? You saw a commercial, the guy walks through mud in the green shoes, it comes out clean. Taintless green shoe, the purple shoe. You only see busted up purple shoes. You always see people getting purple shoes busted up. No one takes care of the purple shoes. You watch movies, the purple shoes always die first. On the news, purple shoes always getting stabbed. Who stabs the shoe? Why are you stabbing the shoe? What's the shoe doing to you? Every time we see that, I think it programs us to associate that shoe with that state. And it becomes normal. And we also see it from afar. We can't do anything. So we get the muscle memory of being still and watching these things as well. And so when we see it in real life, we just got a muscle memory as well. And so it's a tricky thing, because on one hand, you're like, okay, more people need to know about this. So yes, let's post it. Let's talk about it. But we're also further programming because of what you're going to do. Are you going to go out and create an organization? Could, but the communal reaction is just to look at a phone in a position of submitting to what is happening on the phone. We're bowing while we watch these things. It's very interesting. It's very interesting, and it's very powerful to understand how much power and intention sometimes, I believe, is put into the way that we perceive these things. But it's encouraging to know how much power you have in using your body to counteract the things that may seem like they're tailored to, but nonetheless detrimentally impact your body and the bodies of the people around you and communities. But it's a tricky thing. I think that just seeing that, I don't know.
And that's okay too. Sometimes we always have to have answers, and sometimes we don't. I think it's a big, it opens up a lot of questions that I think and conversations that need to be had. I want to steer us to a place of imagination. Since we don't have the immediate answers, what we can do is talk about what we ideally would like to see, what we want, what care really looks like. Let's think about it outside of spaces of capitalism, outside of bureaucratic barriers, what would that look like? What in a dream world? And it can be, you can see a very complete picture, you can see words, you can see a scene. Just what does it look like?
I think that one of the biggest things is that we have become very aware that there is a shortage of providers in the mental health field. And so starting at that level, there would be more access for individuals to go to school and get the training so that there would be more therapists that look like us, right? Representation is really important. And, you know, like the stats that Ernesto shared, right? There aren't a lot of therapists that look like us. And it makes it really hard to work within communities and build trust when the individuals treating don't look like the community. So I think that's one of the biggest things. The other thing that I would love to see is just mental health being considered part of health instead of, you know, when, you know, like KAMAUU was mentioning, when we're talking about we're coming from a place of feeling unwell and of needing healing, maybe we start at the beginning. It's a normal part of life, accessing that support, having someone else from outside to talk to, in the same way that we would encourage people to get annual physicals, even when they're not feeling well, right? So.
No, that is a wonderful way to put it. And for me, I think one of the ways that I can think through this is definitely increasing access, right? Increasing access so people have access to culturally responsive services, especially for people of color. And also, I think sometimes, right, we can get used to kind of putting these terms like communities of color as an umbrella term. There's so much diversity, right, within each community, even within, and I'll go back to kind of my identities as being Latinx, Latine. That is an umbrella term, and there's so much diversity within the community. But I think that we need to really also kind of identify what those identities are for people, what they mean, how they make sense of them, and I think be able to train people to know that there's a lot of resiliency and strengths in communities of color, and we can tap into those. And again, therapy is just one way of healing, right? Communities of color have many ways of healing that are not part of mental health or Western therapy. And I think also putting in resources into training us as mental health providers to also work with people and leveraging those, you know, strengths or resiliency methods so that we can support the communities and not just have it be like this Western model of therapy. Because again, that's helpful, but that's one of many ways of healing. And the second thing for me is, again, is making sure that when there's conversations around mental health, especially, you know, locally, nationally, that we include people that are mental health providers in those conversations. Otherwise, we tend to see a lot of these policies that are made and they don't work because oftentimes they're not taking in information from people that are on the field or doing the work. So I think it's making sure that we're not just saying, oh, we're increasing funding for mental health, is how, right? And in what ways? And making sure that people that are at the table are people that are part of those communities as well, so that we can really get to some of these effective policy and institutional decisions that I think can really make a difference at the larger scale.
I think it's really cool because I'm thinking of the answer from a completely different space. We're all thinking of it, but I'm in like a different space, you all, and it's like it really makes, I'm seeing like the teamwork aspect of it, you know, and because if we're thinking about, on one end, there's always going to be the need to refine and to correct, you know, and so you all are refiners and correctors, you know. And I think the other half of the equation is to address and change the way that we articulate our bodies every day, our presence every day, so that bi-monthly or yearly or whatever, however you get your physical and your mental checkups and all of these things, so that when we get to those checkpoints, we're in better states. Because maybe we might get to a place where your job isn't to fix anything, it's to imagine add-ons. So now it's like, what if people come to you and they're just good, and you're like, you're already good. It's like, I don't need to fix your car. Let's just talk about what you want the car to do. I want my car to fly. And you're like, all right, let's figure it out, right? You know, what if that's the future of therapy? What if it's not maybe what if correcting is like a secondary thing? But the job description is go from that to imagination realizers, you know? And so I think part of the route to that could potentially be pride. How we take pride in whatever your occupation is, whatever you do, understand that it has a place in the creation of culture, which impacts everybody in the culture. Culture is just a collection of traditions. Tradition is the repetition of a way of dealing with a certain thing. So there's cooking traditions, the way we approach cooking. There is communication traditions, the way that we address each other, how we address each other. And there are traditions that aren't known, aren't thought about, but they are traditions, like the way that we sit, the way that we walk. You know, you have traditions in culture in a family. They all talk alike. They all have the same tick. And I think for me as a musician, understanding that makes me more tangibly realize, okay, if I want to have a good impact, it's not just talking about certain things, it's just understanding the way that my art is perceived is going to have some type of influence because it's being perceived on how people address their own lives. If a chef were to do it, okay, I know you want to make money and you want to make sure food tastes good, but you're making food is going into people's bodies. If people are constantly eating nourishing things, they won't need to go to the doctor to get fixed anymore, you know. And so for me, I'm like the chef to the mind. And so if I make better food that people are consuming, maybe that'll contribute to people, you know, now it's a collaborative effort rather than you just fixing something, you know. And I think, but that goes for almost any position. I think whatever you do, even if you don't have an occupation that is what you think your calling is, just understanding that you come into contact with a lot of people and try to work on ourselves the best that we can so that when we interact with people, we're not passing on our disorders, but creating order in itself so that it's contagious. Even if you're not a chef, if you're not a physical trainer, if you're not you work at Walmart, you know, if you create a level of order in yourself that just spreads like pleasance, the person may your job might be putting the garbanzo beans in aisle 5, but you can still spread some contagious order, you know. So, but I think from right now, what I would hope to give someone to take away is just to really critique and view yourself and study yourself. I have a morning routine, and every morning I get up early enough so that I have time to just move and see where the pain is, right? And then put myself in painful situations like a plank, and then experience myself in this uncomfortable situation having a relaxed posture, breathing slowly. And so that I'm programming myself so if someone comes up to try to, in this unpleasant situation, I've already seen myself in the beginning of the day handle something that's very unpleasant, a 4-minute plank. For me, that's like a lot, you know. And I smiled, but not with my face, but with my body. And I articulated these things that have more longevity than like tenseness, you know. So those are my main things.
I think I really appreciate what you're saying, because I think in some ways when we talk about therapy or mental health, there's always, I think, this conversation around like something is wrong, right? Or you're coming to therapy to heal. And one of the most beautiful things that can happen in therapy is that, yes, sometimes people reach mental health services because they are working through something or healing through something. Therapy can also be a space for you to learn more about yourself, to understand who you are, why you react to things to a certain way, what's going on in your relationships, that we oftentimes don't think about therapy as being something that you can actually use to improve yourself or just grow and learn more. And I think that's something that would be very helpful for a lot of people to know, that therapy isn't just to kind of fix or to heal things, it also just to kind of learn more about yourself. And that I think can just be a much better process and less scary sometimes for people.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you everyone. I think we are at time. So thank you everyone for your contributions today and leaving us with some good thoughts. And I encourage everyone to start to imagine not only how you're going to take these steps to take care of yourself, but also for your community as a whole. So thank you all.
Can I say one last thing?
Yes.
I just want to affirm that everybody in here is much smarter than you think. And when we read things discovered by, or when we read facts about the human body and all of that stuff, or the human mind and how it works, that just came from people observing things. You have the quickest and most consistent access to the subject matter of yourself. So I really encourage you, take time every single day and make it consistent. So just pick 30 seconds in the morning. Start with that. After 2 months of doing 30 seconds, you have the habit of knowing I am doing something consistently, right? But just take a little bit of time just to study yourself, whatever that means. Even if it means sitting still, you could just do it through dancing, you could do it through writing, but pay attention to yourself, because everybody needs attention. Everybody needs attention. My toe is also a body. Everybody, something that is composed of small working parts to establish that thing. Everybody needs attention. You need attention. Don't just put it on our friends up here. Don't just neglect it and just dump it all. Like, every day I'm like, blah, blah, and he's like, you're doing your best, but, you know? Yeah, because then it could be more of a collaborative. Because now I'm coming to you with self-awareness. So half of the work that you would have spent on making me aware, you're just showing me, you're finding out things about me, and I'm finding, you're not just showing me things that you already knew were there, you know. And then since I already know something, then we both find things out together, but it's just, you know. So you're smarter than you think, and if you think you're really smart, you're smarter than that. Because you're not your mind, you're your cells, and your cells, this is the last thing I'm going to say, every single second, the things inside of you achieve their desired result with absolute precision. If you met a person that was the track record of their life, you would think that they were a brilliant sage. You are composed of millions of brilliant sages. You are very intelligent. Take time to listen to the intelligence and study yourself. That's it.
Thank you.